April 16th, 1945, dawned a bright spring morning in Germany. A peculiar sight could be observed on the road leading from the city of Weimar, a procession. Hundreds of individuals, men in fine suits and fedora hats, women adorned in furs, sporting lipstick and high heels, were engaged in conversation, smiling, some even laughing. They appear to be en route to a garden fête or an opera performance, representing the crème de la crème of Weimar, its affluent, educated, and culturally refined elite. However, their destination was not a social gathering, but a forced march at gunpoint. American soldiers, their faces grim and their uniforms soiled, hands resting on the triggers of their M1 Garens, flanked them on either side. The soldiers' expressions were devoid of mirth. They were escorting these distinguished citizens up a hill known as the Ettersberg, approximately 5 miles distant, toward the location the citizens vehemently claimed ignorance of, a place named Buchenwald. Throughout the arduous trek, the citizens voiced their displeasure and disbelief. "Why are we being subjected to this indignity?" they grumbled. "My shoes are becoming caked with dust." They perceived the entire affair as a charade, a propaganda ploy by the Americans, who they believed were exaggerating the circumstances and that their own hands were clean. However, General George S. Patton harbored a starkly different conviction. He had personally inspected the camp 2 days prior, bearing witness to the ovens and the amenities, including a zoo, that the SS had constructed for their own amusement while the incarcerated languished from starvation. This grim discovery had solidified his resolve that Weimar's professed innocence was a fabrication. He was determined to shatter this illusion, to confront the most sophisticated minds in Germany with the unvarnished reality of their own history. If they claimed ignorance, he would provide them with an unmediated tour. This is the chronicle of the parade of shame, the narrative of how Germany's cultural heartland found itself adjacent to the gates of hell, and the pivotal moment when the veneer of civility was irrevocably stripped from the faces of the German elite. To comprehend the horrors of Buchenwald, one must first appreciate the celebrated beauty of Weimar. Weimar was no ordinary German municipality. It was considered the very soul of Germany. It was the city of Goethe, the city of Schiller, the cradle of the Bauhaus movement. It boasted an abundance of libraries, theaters, and verdant parks. Its inhabitants took immense pride in their supposed civilization, immersing themselves in the symphonies of Beethoven and the profound inquiries of philosophy, believing themselves to be the zenith of European culture. Yet, a mere 5 miles away, nestled atop a picturesque, tree-lined ascent, lay a veritable factory of death. Buchenwald concentration camp had been established in 1937, and for 8 years, it operated with brazen impunity, directly under the noses of Weimar's esteemed citizenry. SS officers resided in comfortable suburban homes. Their wives frequented Weimar's boutiques, and they attended the same cultural events. The acrid smoke emanating from the crematorium would drift over the city, and the ashes would settle upon their windowsills. Nevertheless, upon the arrival of the American forces, the citizens of Weimar uniformly uttered the same 4 words: "Wir haben es nicht gewusst," we knew nothing. They concocted explanations, claiming the smoke originated from a factory and that the emaciated men toiling on the railway were merely volunteers. They existed within a self-imposed bubble of denial. But on April 11th, 1945, that bubble irrevocably burst. The United States Third Army arrived. As Patton's tanks advanced into the vicinity, the SS forces retreated, and the surviving prisoners seized control of the camp. Patton arrived a few days later, having previously witnessed the atrocities at Ohrdruf. He believed himself prepared, but he was not. Buchenwald was vast, with 20,000 prisoners still present, walking skeletons, men weighing as little as 60 pounds, children who had seemingly forgotten how to smile. Patton strode through the camp gates, his gaze falling upon a courtyard piled high with bodies. Hundreds of them, stacked like cordwood, their naked forms splayed, skin jaundiced, eyes vacant. Patton, a man forged in the crucible of war, a man of blood and guts, was profoundly shaken. He recorded in his diary, "I have never felt so sick in my life. This is not war. This is madness." He observed the German civilians in the adjacent fields, engaged in their daily routines of plowing land and hanging laundry, seemingly oblivious to the overpowering stench of death that was so noxious it caused the American soldiers to retch. Patton turned to the camp commandant and inquired, "Do the people in that town know about this?" The commandant replied, "They say they don't, General." Patton's face contorted with rage. He slammed his riding crop against his boot. "They are lying," he declared, "and I'm going to prove it." Patton summoned the provost marshal and issued an order unprecedented in the annals of warfare. He didn't merely demand the mayor. He demanded the elite. He instructed his military police to infiltrate Weimar, to apprehend the wealthiest citizens, the professors, the lawyers, the businessmen, and the wives of politicians. Round up 1,000 of them, he commanded. The MPs entered the city, knocking on the doors of opulent villas and entering shops. They informed the civilians, "You are going for a walk. Put on your coats. General Patton invites you to visit your neighbors." Confusion and indignation rippled through the German populace. "I am a doctor," one man protested. "You cannot order me around." The MP simply raised his rifle. "Start walking." A peculiar spectacle unfolded. A column of 1,000 immaculately dressed civilians marching uphill. American jeeps patrolled alongside, ensuring no one strayed. The prevailing mood among the Germans remained lighthearted. They chatted amongst themselves, some women even adjusting their hairstyles, treating the event as a mere inconvenience, a peculiar American game. They smiled for the cameras, utterly unaware of the horrors awaiting them at the summit of the hill. The march extended for approximately 2 hours. As they drew closer to the crest of the Ettersberg, the conversations dwindled. The wind shifted and the stench assaulted them. It was more than just the odor of decaying flesh. It was the pervasive aroma of ancient death, stale, heavy, cloying, clinging to the back of one's throat. The smiles vanished from the women's faces. They retrieved handkerchiefs and perfumed scarves, attempting to stifle their revulsion, but the MPs urged them onward. "Keep moving. No stopping." They reached the main gate, the infamous iron portal of Buchenwald. The inscription above the entrance read, "Jedem das Sein," to each his own, a grimly ironic Nazi pronouncement. The civilians passed through the gate and stepped directly into hell. The first sight that greeted them was the prisoners, numbering in the thousands, standing behind barbed wire, their silence profound, their gazes fixed. These were the individuals the civilians had claimed did not exist. They stared at the opulent fur coats and the tailored suits. Their eyes were hollow, devoid of life. They did not cry out, nor did they attack. They simply observed, and that silent, unblinking stare was more terrifying than any weapon. The American soldiers formed a perimeter, guiding the civilians towards their initial destination, the crematorium. In the courtyard of the crematorium stood a trailer, piled high with bodies, naked, emaciated forms, their limbs entangled, their mouths agape in silent screams. The civilians halted, their faces draining of color. A woman in a fur coat clutched her mouth, her body beginning to tremble, before letting out a piercing scream and collapsing into the mud. An American MP approached her, not to offer aid, but to nudge her with his boot. "Get up," he commanded. "You haven't seen anything yet." This was the definitive moment when the myth of the good German was irrevocably shattered. While history books often sanitize such accounts, this narrative will not. If you believe that the truth, however grim, must be disseminated, please consider subscribing to help us preserve history. Now, let's enter the chamber of torment. The Americans compelled the civilians to file past the bodies, forcing them to confront the reality. If a man averted his gaze, a soldier would grip his chin and turn his head back. "Look," they would shout, "look at what you have done." They were then led into a building that served as the pathology laboratory. The SS meticulously kept medical records, but they also collected macabre souvenirs. On a table, displayed like items in a shop window, lay the artifacts of SS depravity. 2 preserved shrunken heads, taken from Polish prisoners, and pieces of tattooed human skin. Ilse Koch, the wife of the camp commandant, infamously known as the Bitch of Buchenwald, had a particular fondness for tattoos. She would order prisoners with striking tattoos to be killed so that their skin could be fashioned into lampshades. The civilians stared at the table, their faces a mask of horror. The men in suits wept openly, some retching in the corners. Patton had orchestrated this exhibit, intending for them to grasp that this was not merely war, but an act of perversion, an embodiment of pure evil. An American officer, fluent in German, stood beside the table. "You claim you knew nothing?" he stated. "These were crafted here, in your own backyard, while you attended the theater and sipped your coffee." The civilians offered no response. Their carefully constructed edifice of denial had crumbled, leaving them exposed in their collective guilt. The tour continued, leading them to the little camp, a quarantine zone where prisoners were abandoned to perish from typhus. The stench here was so overpowering that even the American soldiers wore gas masks. However, the civilians were denied such protection. They were forced to inhale the putrid air. A former prisoner, a man reduced to a skeletal frame, approached a well-dressed German banker, his finger trembling as he pointed. "I remember you," the prisoner rasped. "I worked at the train station. I saw you. You saw me. You looked away." The banker broke down, collapsing to his knees, weeping. "I didn't know. I didn't know." Yet no one believed him, not even himself. By the conclusion of the tour, the 1,000 citizens of Weimar were utterly devastated. They exited the gate in somber silence. The cheerful chatter had ceased, the smiles had vanished. Tears streaked the makeup of the women, and dust coated the expensive suits of the men. They descended the hill, returning to their celebrated city of poets, but the city would never again appear the same to them. Every glance towards the hill would conjure the spectral images of the deceased. When General Eisenhower learned of Patton's initiative, he did not reprimand him. Instead, he expanded the order. He recognized the profound importance of Patton's action. He dispatched a cable to Washington and London, demanding the presence of the press, congressmen, parliament members, and newspaper editors. He sought credible witnesses. He famously declared, "The things I saw beggar description. I made the visit deliberately in order to be in a position to give first-hand evidence of these things, if ever in the future there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda." Eisenhower foresaw the attempts to deny the Holocaust, anticipating that decades later, some would claim it never happened. Therefore, he compelled the Germans to become the witnesses against themselves. The impact of this forced excursion was immediate. That night, back in Weimar, the weight of shame proved too much for some. Similar to the suicides witnessed at Ohrdruf, the burden of guilt claimed lives. Several prominent citizens who had participated in the tour took their own lives in the ensuing days, coming to the devastating realization that their culture, their education, their civilization had utterly failed to prevent them from becoming complicit in monstrous acts. They could not bear to face the reflection of their actions in the mirror. When informed of these suicides, Patton neither celebrated nor mourned. He simply remarked, "Good. Maybe the rest of them will learn." The forced tour of Buchenwald stands as a moment history must never forget. It compels us to ponder a question that remains relevant today. To what extent is the average citizen aware of their government's transgressions? The people of Weimar were not the direct perpetrators of the atrocities, nor were they the ones operating the gas chambers, but they were the ones who turned a blind eye, the ones who maintained their silence. Patton understood that silence is a form of complicity. He knew that one cannot claim innocence merely by closing one's eyes. On that fateful day in April 1945, he forced them to open their eyes, and in doing so, he compelled the world to do the same. The citizens of Weimar ascended the hill as arrogant aristocrats. They descended as broken accomplices, forever haunted by the specter of Buchenwald. The plea of "we didn't know" continues to be uttered even today. Do you genuinely believe the citizens were unaware, or were they simply fabricating stories to shield themselves? Share your perspectives in the comment section. And if you wish to witness the story of how American soldiers exacted retribution upon the SS guards at Dachau, that video will be released shortly. Ensure you subscribe to avoid missing it. Thank you for watching.